Hi, this is Andrew from Unitarian Apologetics. Welcome to this very special presentation. Today we're going to continue our Demystified series where we shed light on texts which are often misused or misunderstood. Hebrews 1:10 is often understood as a reference to the Genesis creation account, but we're going to show that the author of Hebrews, reading from the Septuagint, sees this as fulfilling prophecies of the Messiah recreating the heavens and the earth in the future. Hebrews 1:10 reads, "You, Lord, laid the foundation of the earth in the beginning, and the heavens are the works of your hands." I do want to start by saying that we do see this as referring to Jesus. So when we read Hebrews 1:10, we read it, "You, Lord Jesus, laid the foundation of the earth in the beginning, and the heavens are the works of your hands." The first important thing to note here is that the author of Hebrews is reading from the Septuagint version of Psalm 102, which is going to prove very important. We see here in the Hebrew version of the text, it simply reads, "In the beginning, you laid the foundations of the earth." But when we get to the Septuagint version, we see the addition of this Lord here, which our author quotes in Hebrews 1:10. "In the beginning, you, Lord, laid the foundations of the earth." Now, before moving forward, since our author is quoting Psalm 102, it's important that we go back and look at this psalm so we can understand better the context of this psalm. We see here in the introductory heading to Psalm 102 that this is a prayer of one who is afflicted when he grows faint and pours out his lament before Yahweh. So, in the original Hebrew version of Psalm 102, throughout this entire psalm, it is simply a man pouring out his lament before Yahweh. Verses 4, 6, and 8 read, "My heart is afflicted and withered like grass. I even forget to eat my bread. I'm like an owl among the ruins. All day long my enemies taunt me. They ridicule me and curse me, for I've eaten ashes like bread and mixed my drink with tears." Then, when we get down to verses 23 through 25, the man says, "God has broken my strength on the way. He has cut short my days. I say, oh my God, do not take me in the midst of my days. Your years go on throughout all generations. In the beginning, you laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the works of your hands." So, again, in the Hebrew text, the entire psalm is simply a man pouring out his lament before God. But something very important happens when we get to the Septuagint, which is going to recontextualize the psalm. While in the Hebrew text, this is the man pouring out his lament before God, in the Septuagint, God is going to respond back. The Septuagint reads, "God answered him in the way of his strength. Tell me the fewness of my days." So, how does this happen? I think the answer is quite simple once we go back and look at the Hebrew text. In the Hebrew, we see this word "ana" in the unpointed form, and this word "ana" can have the meaning of either afflicted or answered, and which meaning it has is going to depend on the context in which it appears. It's not till at least 1,000 years later that we have the pointed Masoretic text, which can give a word a more specific meaning. When these vowel points are added to a word, for instance, it can change the mood or the tense or the gender of a word. And so at the top here, again, we have this consonantal skeleton form. We see that when these Masoretic vowel points are added, it can give the word a more specific meaning. So how this happens is that in the unpointed form, the word "ana" can mean either answered or afflicted. And while in the Hebrew text, this was understood as afflicted, the translators of the Septuagint, and then later our author in Hebrews, see this as God's answer to the man. William Lane comments on this in volume 47a of the Word Biblical Commentary. He says on page 30, in its original context, Psalm 102, 25 through 27 clearly refers to the immutable character of God. The psalmist contrasts the ability of Yahweh to stand above the change and decay of the created order with his own experience of affliction and exposure to death. In the Septuagint, however, a mistranslation of the unpointed Hebrew text made it possible to read the text Christologically. The Hebrew radicals "ana," he afflicted, were translated he answered. In the Septuagint, we see the Greek word apokryphe, and in the Vulgate, it's the Latin word responded, like the English word responded, with the result that verses 23 through 28 become the response of Yahweh. Consequently, Psalm 102, 25 through 27 in the Septuagint must refer to the creative activity of divine wisdom or of the Messiah rather than of God. It is this understanding that stands behind the selection of this text for the chain of quotations developed in Hebrews 1 5 through 13. And the word that we find in the Septuagint is this Greek word apokryphe. And for instance, we see 83 occurrences of apokryphe in the New Testament, and it always means answered or responded within a conversation between two parties. And so, while in the original Hebrew text, this probably had the meaning of afflicted, the translators of the Septuagint, and then later our author in Hebrews, understand this as God answering the man and telling him proleptically he has laid the foundations of the earth in the future for the new creation. And so the question naturally arises, wait, the Messiah created the heavens and the earth? And that is correct. And we're going to argue here that this is indeed what the author of Hebrews has in mind, fulfilling Old Testament prophecy and the theme of the Messiah recreating the heavens and the earth. The first solid contextual evidence we find for this understanding comes from Hebrews 2:5. Hebrews 2:5 reads, "For it is not to angels that God has subjected the world to come, about which we are speaking." In other words, the author is saying here that the world to come is the theme of our epistle here, and we're going to demonstrate why this is true. Again, though, since our author has quoted Psalm 102, we're going to want to look at Psalm 102 to gather more evidence to see how they would have understood it in this way. Verses 13, 16 to 21 read, concerning a future time when God will restore Zion. Verse 13, you will rise up and have compassion on Zion, for it is time to show her favor. The appointed time has come. For Yahweh will rebuild Zion, that they may proclaim the name of Yahweh in Zion and praise him in Jerusalem. Notice here that it's talking about a future appointed time in which God is going to restore Zion. Another crucial text to look at here, which has the same theme and even more explicitly of the recreation of Zion, is in Isaiah 51. Isaiah 51:3 reads, for Yahweh will comfort Zion and will look with compassion on all her ruins. He will make her wilderness like Eden and her desert like the garden of Yahweh. So again, here we see explicit imagery of the recreation of Zion with explicit Genesis creation language referring to Eden and the Garden of Eden, which the author calls here the Garden of Yahweh. Isaiah 51, 5 through 6, my righteousness draws near, my salvation is on the way, and my arms will bring justice to the nations. The coast will look for me and wait in hope for my arm. Lift up your eyes to the heavens and look at the earth below, for the heavens will vanish like smoke, the earth will wear out like a garment. And of course, this is the same exact thing we're reading in Hebrews 1:11. Verses 11 through 13 and Isaiah 51 read, so the redeemed of Yahweh will return and enter Zion with singing, crowned with everlasting joy. I, even I, am he who comforts you. But you have forgotten Yahweh, your Maker, who stretched out the heavens and laid the foundations of the earth. So it's very important to note here that it's telling us that Yahweh has already stretched out the heavens and laid the foundations of the earth in the Genesis creation account. But also in 51:3, it talks about how God will have compassion on her ruins. Then he will make her wilderness like Eden and her desert like the garden of Yahweh, speaking about the recreation of the cosmos. Another important text to look at here briefly before continuing in Isaiah 51 is in Jeremiah chapter 4, where we see the same theme concerning Zion. Verse 6, it reads, raise a signal flag towards Zion, seek refuge, do not delay. Then Jeremiah is having this prophetic vision in verse 23, and he says, I looked at the earth, and it was formless and void. I looked to the heavens and they had no light. The NET Bible commentary notes here that the words tohu vabohu allude to Genesis 1:2, hyperbolically picturing a reversal of creation and return to the original pre-creation chaos. And here Jeremiah sees the heavens and the earth returning back to their original pre-creation chaos. But let's continue in Isaiah 51 to see how, although things are going to return back to their original pre creation chaotic state through the Messiah, God is going to recreate them. Isaiah 51:12 through 16 reads, "For I am Yahweh your God, who stirs up the sea so that its waves roar." Goes on to say in 16, "I have put my words in your mouth and covered you with the shadow of my hand to establish the heavens and to found the earth, and to say to Zion, you are my people." So although that the original heavens and the earth have been established here by Yahweh in Isaiah 51, we also read that they're going to return to this pre-creation chaotic state before God's going to put his words in the mouth of the prophet, who we can say is the Messiah here, to establish the heavens and to found the earth in the future. And so this theme about new creation and the Messiah recreating the heavens and the earth already exists within Psalm 102, especially in the Septuagint version, which our author is citing from, and how he would have understood it. But also we see in Isaiah and even in Jeremiah this idea about creation going to this pre-creation chaotic state before being recreated through the Messiah. And it's also important to note that while this process has begun, while these things have been inaugurated, and while they've been prophesied as if they've already happened proleptically in some instances, we see that even in the New Testament, for instance, in 2 Peter 3:13, we read that we're still looking forward to the fulfillment of what's prophesied concerning the new heavens and the new earth. And then in Revelation, in this apocalyptic vision, we read about this new heaven and new earth being fully realized. Another important text we see here is Isaiah 55:17, which reads, "For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things shall not be remembered or come to mind." So this is the theme and line of thought that our author in Hebrews sees, and we're going to demonstrate that further throughout this video. That instead of speaking about the original Genesis creation account, it was already prophesied and understood that the Messiah would recreate the heavens and the earth in the future. So now we're going to look at some common objections that people have to this reading. They often object and say, well, if God is responding to the human, then why does God say, "Tell me the fewness of my days"? And this is a fair question because, again, in the original context, this is the man speaking to God about the frailty of his life and asking God to not take him away in the midst of his days or to cut his life short. But if we accept this reading of God answering the man, then this would have God telling the man to show him the fewness of God's days. Again, I want to back up here in Psalm 102 to see how this would have been understood once the verse was recontextualized in verses 23 through 28. In verse 13, we read, "You will rise up and have compassion on Zion, for it is time to show her favor. The appointed time has come." In verse 16, "For Yahweh will rebuild Zion," all looking forward to a future time in which God will restore Zion. And again, when we look at Isaiah 51, we see the same thing concerning Zion. "For Yahweh will comfort Zion and will look with compassion on all her ruins. He will make her wilderness like Eden and her desert like the garden of Yahweh." So when the context changes in the Septuagint and God is speaking to the man, the shortness of days there is understood as in the shortness of days until Yahweh will restore Zion. F. Bruce notes this in his commentary on the Epistle to the Hebrews. On page 62, he writes, "This is God's answer to the suppliant. God bids the man to acknowledge the shortness of God's set time for the restoration of Jerusalem, as in verse 13, and not to summon him to act when that time has only half expired." So again here, in the original context, This would have been understood as the afflicted man asking God to not cut his days short. Here, when it's recontextualized, we see that there's no contradiction, and how it can be understood also as God answering the man concerning the shortness of God's set time to restore Zion. The next common objection we see to this reading is that if it talks about the new heavens and the new earth, which have come through the Messiah, why then does it say that they'll fade away in the next line? So, for instance, we read, "You, Lord Jesus, laid the foundations of the earth in the beginning, and the heavens are the works of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will wear out like a garment." And so they often see what appears to be a syntactical contradiction in that you see the heavens and the earth being prophesied about being created, but then also wearing out. But I want to back up again here to demonstrate that we see the same exact thing in Isaiah 51, yet we wouldn't say it creates a syntactical contradiction. We see in verse 6 where it reads, "For the heavens will vanish like smoke, the earth will wear out like a garment." In verse 13, we read, "But you have forgotten Yahweh your Maker, who stretched out the heavens and laid the foundation of the earth." So, according to this text, verse 13, of course, is speaking about the Genesis creation account when God has already stretched out the heavens and laid the foundations of the earth. But then when we get to verse 16, we have God speaking to the prophet and says that I have put my words in your mouth and covered you with the shadow of my hand to establish the heavens and to found the earth. Now, would we say that there's a syntactical contradiction here? Since the heavens and the earth have already been laid by Yahweh in Genesis creation, yet they're going to be established in the future? No, because we have to understand what these authors are intending to communicate. And obviously, here, the creation of the heavens and the earth would have a different meaning in verse 16, which speaks about the future establishment of the heavens and the earth. John Watts comments on this dynamic in volume 25 of the Word Biblical Commentary. Concerning Isaiah 51:16, he writes, Yahweh addresses the one he is using, putting his words in his mouth and protecting him carefully. The purpose of this care is to allow him to plant heavens and found earth. That makes no sense if it refers to the original creation. Heavens and land here must refer metaphorically to the totality of order in Palestine. Heavens meaning the broader overarching structure of the empire, while land is the political order in Palestine itself. And so while this may be the best way to understand Isaiah 51:16 within this original context, we're going to see that the author of Hebrews takes the same line of thought and sees the recreation of the heavens and the earth as referring to metaphorically the totality of order within the heavens and the earth and not the Genesis creation. Again, noting here that in Hebrews 2:5, the author tells us explicitly, it is not to the angels that he has subjected the world to come about which we are speaking. He's telling us that the whole theme of the epistle is about the coming of the new order and the passing of the old. And when we look here of an outline of Hebrews, we see that every single chapter in the entire epistle concerns the establishment of the new created order through the sacrifice of Jesus and his enthronement as king. So, in the heavenly order, with the establishment of the new created order, we see that Jesus has been seated at the right hand of God and rules over an unshakable kingdom. Also, something important to note here is Hebrews 2:8, which reads, When God subjected all things to him, he left nothing outside of his control. Yet at present, we do not see everything subject to him. So, just like in Hebrews 1:10, which speak about the creation of the heavens and the earth, we see how these verses are understood sometimes as proleptic in nature. In other words, speaking about something as if it's happened, even though the reality has not been fully realized. Because again, we read here, when God subjected all things to him, yet in the very next line we read, yet at present we do not see everything subject to him. So when we read about the heavens and the earth being created, this is still a future event, even though we read these things have been inaugurated when Jesus, after making purification for sins, sat down at the right hand of God, both establishing the new covenantal order and being enthroned as king over an unshakable kingdom. And one way we see things as being recreated on earth is that the whole covenantal society has changed. God has formed a new covenant people and a new covenant based on better promises. We have not come to a physical temple, and there is no more ritualistic law system. Instead, we are to have our senses trained to discern good and evil by the Spirit, which of course is a common theme, especially in the writings of Paul. That the old order, the old covenantal order, is passing away, and the establishment of the new has been inaugurated. And for anyone contesting this reading, everything I've said here is supported by the verses on the screen. And so, again, while some people see this as a reference to the Genesis creation, I find that there's much stronger contextual support and coherence with this idea that what's being spoken about here by the author of Hebrews is the fulfillment of prophecy in the Old Testament, which speaks about a time in the future which God will recreate the heavens and the earth through his Messiah.